Good morning and welcome to the National Newspaper Publishers Association's Let It Be Known on this Friday, February 25th, 2022. When actor Chadwick Boseman died, he didn't have a will. Neither did recording artist Prince and Aretha Franklin. Each time the news broke, there was surprise that such notable names hadn't made estate plans. Yet estate planning isn't as common as experts argue it should be, particularly among Black Americans. Overall, 33% of U.S. adults have a will, according to Karen.com's 2021 Wills and Estate Planning Survey. Meanwhile, 27.5% of Black Americans have one, up from 25.9% in 2020. The result is that Black Americans are missing out on the largest wealth transfer in history. We talk about it this morning with Attorney Jamy Barreau, who specializes in estate planning, probate, and business, and is dedicated to the preservation of generational wealth. Also, we speak with Tunde Ogunlana from South Florida, who also is in wills, estates, and planning. But first, the headlines this morning. And we start with some breaking news. President Joe Biden has made a decision on his first nomination to the Supreme Court to replace retiring Justice Stephen Breyer. The decision was reached late last night, Let It Be Known has learned. A formal announcement is expected later today as Vice President Kamala Harris has canceled plans to travel to Louisiana and will be by the president's side when he makes the historic announcement. While the finalists are strongly believed to be U.S. Circuit Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, California Supreme Court Justice Leandra Kruger, and U.S. District Judge J. Michelle Childs, the individual has indeed been informed of the decision, according to administration officials. The decision comes on the 2-year anniversary of when then-candidate Joe Biden made the pledge to nominate a Black woman to the Supreme Court. Stay tuned to the Black Press of America and the more than 230 NMPA member newspapers for updates throughout the day, as the announcement is imminent. The White House says that it will come either today, but no later than Monday, but it all seems to be today. And also late word, as we go live this morning in an email I just got, it appears, and this is for those tea leaf readers, U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit deviated from its typical procedure by issuing an opinion yesterday. Well, what does that mean as far as the SCOTUS pick? It broke its usual schedule of Tuesday and Friday, which only widens the speculation that the choice is actually Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. But of course, that is right now can only be considered as speculation, but we will find out later today and update you. Also in the news this morning, as Russian forces continue its invasion of Afghanistan and President Biden places sanction on Moscow, many African Americans and those on the continent are expressing growing sentiment and fears for tens of thousands of Black Ukrainian citizens and the 70,000 Black Russian citizens caught in the crossfire. The Black press has learned that many of the individuals in the Ukraine are students from Africa with no way out. So far, it isn't known how many or if any have been among the early casualties as fighter jets dropped bombs in several Ukraine cities and residential neighborhoods. Terrell J. Starr, who hosts the Black Diplomats podcast that focuses on the intersection of race and foreign policy, said even a highly pro-Black activist like Malcolm X knew the power of solidarity. He says, I suggest we follow his lead as it pertains to Ukraine, because colonial conquest of any nation should alarm us all, be it by Russia or even our native United States. We should be concerned as to what's happening with our Black brothers and sisters in the Ukraine and as well as Russia. Also in the news this morning, a federal jury reached a verdict late Thursday in the trial of 3 former Minneapolis police officers charged with violating the civil rights of George Floyd, a Black man whose death at the hands of police in 2020 spurred protests against systemic racism around the world. The former officers J. Alexander Kwong, Thomas Lane, and Tao Thao were found guilty with depriving Floyd of his civil rights while acting under government authority. Kwong and Thao face an additional charge of not intervening to stop their fellow officer, Derek Chauvin, from using excessive force. They had pleaded not guilty and now face up to life in prison, though legal pundits say such a severe punishment is unlikely. A state trial is also scheduled for these three officers in June, for June, and charges include aiding and abetting murder and also manslaughter. In closing arguments, prosecutors told the jury that the defendants had front row seats to George Floyd's murder and chose to do nothing to keep him, while Chauvin knelt on Floyd's neck for 9.5 minutes. So those officers have been found guilty, and the sentencing is scheduled to happen soon. This morning, we talk about generational wealth. Well, I'm sorry, we have another news topic. Columbia University, out of Columbia University in New York, Columbia University's psychiatry department head has been suspended after he tweeted a photo of a dark-skinned model and commented on her skin color, referring to her as a quote-unquote freak of nature. Jeffrey Lieberman shared the tweet about model Nayakim Gatwech, who is of South Sudanese descent. He wrote, "Whether a work of art or a freak of nature, she's a beautiful sight to behold." He was suspended Wednesday as psychiatry department chair at Columbia's Vagelos College of Physicians and Surgeons, and also removed as psychiatrist in chief at Columbia University's Irving Medical Center in New York Presbyterian Hospital. And according to an email sent to Columbia faculty and staff, his tweets, which was later deleted, quickly received backlash, with some Twitter users demanding he be removed from his position. The model herself slammed his comments as quote unquote straight up racism, coming from somebody with so much power that was so disappointed, she said. She shared the tweet on her Instagram to set the record straight, she said. Now, this morning, we will talk about wills and estates. When actor Chadwick Boseman died, when Prince died, when Aretha Franklin died, they did not leave wills. And that's not uncommon, particularly among Black Americans. We talk about that this morning with our special guest this morning from Florida, Tunde Ogunlana, and of course, Mr. Jamy Barreau, an attorney who specializes in this topic as well. Good morning, gentlemen.
Morning.
Good morning.
So, and Tunde, let me start with you. We know the importance, at least experts like yourself have expounded the importance of a will. Tie that, if you will, to generational wealth.
Great question, and thanks for having me on. I'll back it up and explain the just what is a will and kind of the concept of it, and really what happens here. And I feel deficient here because I have my partner on screen here is a lawyer. I'm not, so he can definitely speak to this better than me. But the probate system in the United States is a state-by-state system, which really is the function we have legally of transferring title from the deceased to whoever their heirs are. So kind of a joke that we have in our industry is, if you don't have an estate plan, your state has one for you, because state statutes, mandate what happens to assets after someone dies. So what the will does is, the will is the legal document that someone creates during their lifetime so that the person who they select, called the executor, the person that they trust to speak to the probate court on their behalf and represent their wishes after they pass, that executor can present the will to the probate court so that the court knows what the deceased person wanted to have done with their assets. So that's just a quick kind of definition of kind of the will itself and what that means. Now, to answer the question about generational wealth, of course, the importance of documenting where you want your assets to go is as you're stating, that helps to promote the transfer of assets to who you want them to go to in the next generation. And so I think that's just a simple kind of, explanation of just how the will functions, from helping a family pass assets such as homes, maybe other real estate, bank accounts, investment accounts, so on and so forth, from their generation to the next.
And Attorney Barreau, as we said at the top, some big names, very wealthy individuals like Prince, like Aretha Franklin, like Chadwick Boseman, did not leave wills. Can you talk a little bit about the confusion that could cause with a family, with an estate?
Yes, absolutely. Well, essentially, when you do pass away without any type of estate planning, whether that be a will or a trust, you do see from on a multitude of levels um, different issues that arise with the courts, right? So if you're dealing with a family, say with a blended family, stepchildren, half siblings, you run into issues where you're not deciding where your assets are going, as Tunde was mentioning before. In those instances, the state is choosing, and regardless of how much you loved your stepchild, regardless as much as you cared for your friend, your neighbor, your pastor, anything like that, your church, if they do not fall into the line of your next of kin under the law, they don't stand a right to benefit from your assets. And I wanted to touch on something because you did mention some big names, Prince, Chadwick Boseman. A lot of people have the misconception that you need to have millions of dollars or you need to be rich to have an estate plan. But the fact of the matter is, as Tunde pointed out, this is a means of passing on property. This is a means of pushing forward generational wealth. And as long as you have property, a bank account, a home, a car, a stamp collection, you have the right to decide where that goes upon your death. And more people should take advantage of that moving forward.
Yeah, and Tunde, there are some, and I've heard some say this, and we are obviously speaking of African Americans, says, well, I don't want to profit off my brother or my father or my sister's death. But is that the wrong is that the wrong attitude to have?
That's a good question, and I want to deflect on purpose. I'll say that from saying right or wrong, because I think some of it is cultural, and in South Florida, like where we live, like I mentioned to you prior to the show, I'm originally from Washington D.C., so I grew up in a more American environment, but down here I've learned a lot about the Latin American culture, the Caribbean culture. It's a very diverse area down here. And I've learned that, when I was younger in my career, there's certain Latin American countries where they just didn't believe in life insurance. And so I learned that a lot of those decisions are very cultural. So I stress not to say a right or wrong, but I would say this: what I learned and how to kind of explain that to some of with these cultural nuances to folks is, I recognize you may not be from this culture or, the United States, but I'll say here, it's not we don't look at this as profiting from someone's death. This is about helping the next generations move forward in this environment, because we're here in the United States, and whether we like it or not, green runs the show in this country. That's the main color, right? So if your kids might have a mortgage, they might have their own kids if you have grandkids, so to leave that a little bit of legacy to them to help cover their own expenses, help at least at the very minimum cover the expenses after your own passing, like if your funeral, your own mortgage, things like that, that helps the next generation to be unburdened so that they can, kind of continue the race without a parachute, dragging them back. So I think that's one of the key areas now, going back, as you mentioned, specifically for us African Americans culturally. And I say this in some of my presentations to clients sometimes, that legally we got immigration, 55, 60 years ago. But culturally, we still are learning certain areas of financial and legal, because a lot of us are the first or second generation to have wealth, just because of the nature of our history in this country. So to your point, and the great idea of having this discussion, and I thank you for inviting me, that this is very important, because the ability for us to pass on wealth through the generations is one way that we will begin to have political power in a staying way over time, like other immigrant groups in this country that have kept their wealth ongoing within the group.
Yeah, and also, what about those who might say, "Well, that person, uh, they have too much debt. I don't want to take on that responsibility." Attorney Barreau, how do you respond to that?
Well, generally speaking, under our laws, I can speak to Florida in particular, where I'm licensed. You are not required to take on the debt of a loved one unless you signed a document saying that you would be responsible for the debt. Um, there's no reason to believe that you would take on that. However, I add a little caveat, right? So suppose your grandfather passed away owning a home. And your grandfather was still making mortgage payments. Well, yes, if your grandfather, let's say he left behind a will and he left the house to you, yes, you have the right to inherit that home, but keep in mind that you do have to deal with that debt, right? So the bank isn't going to hold you personally responsible, but um, they will want somebody to take over those payments. So keep that in mind moving forward.
Okay, and another question coming from our the NMPA's executive administrator, Claudette Perry. She's asking, and I don't know if this is a better question for you, Attorney Barreau, or for you, Tunde, but are monetary trusts taxed, and if so, at what percentage?
So Tunde, I don't know if you want to tackle that.
I can tackle it. Yeah. So there's, just like with many things, there's different types of trust, but I'll stick with the generally most used type is what's called a revocable trust. And so during one's life, the revocable trust is really taxed at the same rate as the person who's funding the grantor, what they call, or the person who owns and is funding the trust. So really, it's your personal income tax rates, because what they call the tax ID number of that trust is your social security number. However, upon death, that revocable trust becomes irrevocable. And there are other reasons why people might have irrevocable trust during their life, but that's a whole separate show. That'll be an hour. So, but just to finish off, the main point is the tax rate on irrevocable trusts are totally separate to an individual. So they begin paying the highest tax bracket of 37% after $12,000 of income. So those are things that, again, I think for the purpose of today's conversation, we may be getting in the weeds a little bit if we go down that road, but it's important as people do this kind of planning to definitely understand that there are different nuances as relates to taxes and other things. When established, I would say go on that second level in the estate plan when you're doing the trust planning, not just the will planning.
And you mentioned earlier about, I think it was Attorney Barreau was mentioning it about the wealth of some of the individuals we mentioned earlier, Aretha Franklin, Prince, etc. But you don't, and you made the point, you don't need to be wealthy to create a will, and you shouldn't look at it that way. But at what point should you start will and estate planning?
And personally, I believe that anyone, as long as you have assets, plan on getting assets, you should be thinking about doing estate planning. In fact, I work with a lot of um, young people who are building up their businesses, building up their brands, starting their families. So really, your economic status should not play a factor into whether or not you want to start some planning. And I want to add to that point to say that estate planning is a lot more than just your will, your trust, passing on that will. There's also making sure that you're taken care of during your life. So for instance, in Florida, you have the right to create a document called a durable power of attorney, giving somebody else that you trust the ability to make financial decisions on your behalf. And a lot of people like to do this just in case they become incapacitated, and they need somebody to step in, pay the bills, make sure the kids are clothed and fed, things of that nature.
So, and Tunde, you are a family wealth advisor. What are some of the more common issues? Obviously, from our interest is from African Americans, from Black people in general. What are the more common conversations like when someone comes into your office?
It's different, and just to say, there's different conversations depending on where the families are. So to Jamie's point, We deal with entrepreneurs, business owner types. So when those families come in and work with us, they're generally more just, whether they're sophisticated or not on the nuances of estate planning, they kind of understand, okay, we got all this stuff that we've accumulated and we need to make sure that, it's kind of accounted for. I would say that those who don't have that type of complexity, like businesses and things, and maybe multiple properties, that tends to be more a bit of an education, that because, like I mentioned earlier, culturally, some of this stuff is new to us. So what I'll see a lot, and I'm sure Jamie can join in on this, is folks that put their kids on their assets. They might have a duplex, a house, but they've got two of their kids on there. It's a joint title, because that's just the way culturally we did stuff, right? When we were excluded from the traditional financial systems and banking, and didn't have, lawyers all over the place that looked like us back in the day. And so because of that kind of cultural history of our distrust of the system, because of the way the system treated us, a lot of times I'm trying to educate people on why they could be unintentionally exposing themselves to risk by doing that. So, for example, if someone has their family member as joint title only because they don't want to have the property go through probate, let's say, what if that family member gets in a car accident and gets sued? What if they go through a divorce in a couple of years? And now, to Jamie's point, like in state of Florida, I'll just speak of our state, it's what's called a no-fault state. So all assets in someone's name get brought in. And if the court sees that they're joint title with their mom on $1 million house, because again, in South Florida, there's a lot of areas that, used to be very affordable. Homes were $80,000 when I moved here 20 years ago that are now, almost $1 million in some neighborhoods. So these are real stories that we see from people. And, if that person is joint title with their mom on that house and they go through a divorce in this state, their spouse can get 50% of their interest. And so those are the things that I think, we try and educate, because, and I think that nuances like that, though unintentional, have led to destruction of wealth in our community over time. And so that's what I usually see when it's the non-business community, is just the need to kind of continue to educate.
Yeah, and as an attorney, Attorney Barreau, I'm sure you've seen some situations where wills have been contested. I go back, keeping in that theme that we talked earlier about these celebrities, but go back to even Michael Jackson. His family contested the will for a while there. They said there was another will, there was a second will that they wanted the court to abide by. When you get situations like that, does that tend to, do you first of all, how do you handle situations like that as an attorney, but also do you find that that's another deterrent in the Black community as to why they don't plan for these things?
So, as an attorney, when you do have a contested will matter, it does turn into a litigated matter with the court. It becomes an issue of proving why the will or the estate planning document that was left behind was insufficient. Whether that be there was another will that existed at the time of death, or whether that be a contesting individual saying that the testator or the decedent, the person who died, passed away, that they didn't have the mental capacity to enter into a will. So there are different types of means of attacking wills. And in terms of deterrence, deterring the Black community from pursuing or creating these estate planning vehicles, I have seen that being a reason with some of my clients through the years, where they say that they just didn't want their family to have a headache. They didn't want them to fight. And what I say to that is, would you rather them fight without a guideline, without a roadmap as to what your wishes were? Or would you rather them still come together and see that you did try to put your wishes there and try to manifest them forward? So in terms of contesting, I tell folks all the time, anybody can bring a lawsuit, anybody can make any arguments they want. It's whether or not it will be valid at the end of the day, whether or not a judge will accept it. And if you're going to prepare your estate planning documents thoroughly with an expert in the field, you highly lower your chances of your wishes being thrown out.
Yeah. So, Tunde, so let's quickly the process. The first thing, I want to do a will. I want to plan my estate today. I call Tunde up. What's the first thing you're gonna tell me?
Well, first I would say call Jamie because he's the attorney. No, but I appreciate it. Start with me, and I'll refer you to Jamie. No, I think what I often tell people, and it's funny because I have had this conversation several times this week, so it's a nice Friday morning here for me to end on this conversation, and that's why these conversations from yesterday come to mind. That it's really, I tell people this is really first of all a personal journey. Because sometimes, people are looking for a bit of a benchmark or roadmap, and they, what do people do normally, or what should I do, And then I give some parameters and say, think about, your kids, your debts, how you want that handled. Do you have? I kind of have a general questions I ask. What are your main priorities? Are you philanthropic? Do you want to give to any institutions, churches, charities, things like that? So you kind of get to know what kind of those parameters, but I really tell people, this is really about how you want to leave a legacy, how you want your future generations to or how you see the vision for them, how you want the world to see you, because really that's what the estate plan is. It's really, when you're not here, a lot of the times that's the last kind of memory people have of how you wanted things conducted after your death with what you had built during this life, if I can put it that way. So that's really what I tell people. I tell them my role, I feel, is just to help guide and educate. But in the end, it's really up to you on how you want that legacy to look and behave.
So, Attorney Barreau, in the few minutes remaining, Tunde has referred me now to you. What are you going to tell me?
When I'm meeting with my clients for the first time, I ask them, what's your end goal? Because I would like to draft your estate plan with the end goal in mind. So if that is mandating that your home that you spent your life paying off, mandating that never be sold, or that it be reserved for your grandchildren to come, let's build a plan based off of that. I think Tunde brought up an excellent point, and I'm so glad that we're having a chance to discuss this, because there's so many ways that generational wealth can, I don't want to say be wasted, but can be diminished. And without proper estate planning, you miss the chance to pass things the way that you want, and you also miss the chance to avoid having to go to probate altogether and avoiding the costs and the time associated with that.
Well, Attorney Jamy Barreau down in Florida, but he can help you no matter where you are. So look him up of the Barreau firm, and of course Tunde Ogunlana.
Well said.
Look him up as well. Wow, this is some great information. So the bottom line, guys, is we all need to strongly consider a will and estate planning, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, we thank you so much for this valuable information this morning. And again, as we close, we again lift up the breaking news this morning out of Washington. There is a pick. The president has reached a decision on his nominee for the next Supreme Court justice. She will be a Black woman. She has been informed, and we will all know later this afternoon. There is a press conference that will be scheduled by the White House. Kamala Harris, the vice president, has postponed her trip to Louisiana this morning so she could be by the president's side and the nominee side. We expect that the official word to come out of the White House later this morning. So we will keep you posted on that as well on this busy Friday, February 25th. Thanks again for joining. Let it be known we will see you on Monday.